Hello, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 117th meeting we've had consecutively. Thank you all for participating in this process. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed, the co-moderators of the meeting. And I like to remind everyone for each meeting, because it's useful to just remember why we're doing this. We created this forum in order to bring the entire world peace movement together around a consolidated idea to create true peace from whatever philosophy you're from, whatever nation you're from, language you speak, religion. It doesn't matter. If you are for true peace, then you are welcome here, and we must have these discussions in order to make these happen. We have an excellent lineup of people today going through the world situation, which has been quite tumultuous if you've been keeping in touch with things. So please take a moment to share this invitation with your friends, your organizations, reasonable enemies, if you have those, to invite them to this discussion today because it will be very important coming up the September 3rd and the SCO meeting. But I'll leave that to our next speaker to to update everyone on what's going on. So with that, I'd like to have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition, to start us off. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, hello to all of you. It is very difficult to determine where one should start because the strategic situation is so full of, dangerous spots which could go out of control, and the whole dynamic in general is not going in a positive direction at all. But let me start with, the most pressing issue, because time is running out in Gaza and the West Bank, where the genocide is continuing every single day. People are dying. Famine is there. The offensive against Gaza City by the IDF has started, and the international community is so far absolutely impotent and doesn't act. Now we are coming up now at the UN General Assembly, and that creates probably the last chance to do something to stop this. Now the military operation against the occupied Palestinians. It's not a war. It's not a war where Israel has declared war on the Palestinians. Israel is the occupying force in a very small concealed area called Gaza, and this is it is unbelievable, and I think we should be aware of the fact that if the whole world community is proving unable to stop a genocide which is going on in front of the eyes of the entire world community, that is not only potentially meaning the death of more than 2 million Palestinians. I think it is the end of civilization, if you can call it civilization after this. So it's the last chance. And on the 18th of September, this is in the middle of the UN General Assembly, the deadline runs out for a provision which was concluded and agreed upon 1 year ago by the UN General Assembly, that Israel has to have compliance with the rulings of the International Court of Justice, or further measures can be adopted by the UN General Assembly. Now, that creates a window because obviously Israel has not been complying. Nobody has been putting pressure on it. The United States has been backing whatever Israel is doing. Western governments have absolutely done nothing substantial to intervene. And that means that the only remedy left is to go to the 1950 Uniting for Peace Resolution 377, which says that if the UN Security Council is blocked by, for example, the permanent veto of one of the permanent five, then the decision-making can go to the UN General Assembly and decide that they will adopt measures. Now, what would be required is that you need a resolution in the United Nations General Assembly which specifies which measures must be taken, including sending their force, either blue helmets or some other military force. That depends naturally on the discussion in the UN General Assembly. And then by a two-thirds majority, they can decide to send such a force. Now, there are all kinds of proposals which, are, side traps and actually, not functioning to remedy the situation, such as a two-state solution, because this does not change the genocide. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese has pointed out to that. And there is now growing resistance, mounting. For example, there is a letter by more than 200 former EU diplomats and other such people demanding action. Also, the staff of Volk Turk, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, are demanding that he takes action. So I would suggest that we discuss this and that we deploy the International Peace Coalition to support such an action of the UN General Assembly Uniting for Peace resolution to go into effect. As I said, this is probably the last chance there is, because if we wait any longer, the majority of the people in Palestine will be dead or, simply, transported to a small area in the south somewhere, amounting to a concentration camp, and, maybe shipped out. Ethnic cleansing is on the agenda. So that's my first point. And one should take note of the fact that of all people, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner just were in a meeting in the White House discussing some proposals for Gaza, and that really smells of the Riviera Gaza proposal. Now, if that genocide would not be enough, and let me just restate it again for emphasis, if the world community fails to act on that, I think we are losing everything. We are not just threatening to lose, the Palestinian people. We are losing, the ability to look into the mirror every morning. We are losing the idea that there is something like right, like international law. So it's really a massive issue which is at stake. Now, as if this would not be enough, I think the situation, what we discussed last week with the IPC meeting, where Professor Postol was putting out this extreme warning that, in his view, and he is the expert, and he has reiterated that, he has the absolute knowledge and evidence, and there is no doubt about what he is saying. And he said basically that Iran has enough nuclear material ready so that either they have already nuclear weapons or they could have them in a few, maybe weeks, maybe days. So he said that we have two undeclared nuclear powers in the Middle East. And to make things worse, the European three, that is Great Britain, France, and Germany, have now activated something which is called the snapback, which refers to reinstituting the sanction regime, which was abandoned after the JPCOA was affected. And now basically they're giving Iran a 30-day deadline to basically again allow the International Atomic Agency for inspections to find out where their remaining nuclear material is. And obviously the answer from the Iranian government has been negative. They say they have no reason to believe that there is any legitimacy, because the last time they cooperated, they were cheated. The United States was negotiating while preparing to back up the Israeli military attack. And they say that they have absolutely no reason to believe that any of these statements made are being true. Now, the Russian government, in the person of Dmitry Polyansky, has denounced this method of what he calls coercion, blackmail by the Europeans. Basically, the Iranians also say that they have no capability, because who wants to listen to these Europeans when they have not been able to intervene with the US attack in the first place? So, Polyansky basically says there are two ways of dealing with issues. One is diplomacy, and the other one is coercion, blackmail, and threat. And that is obviously what the Europeans are now doing. And, there is also a study out which says that the sanction regime has caused more than 500,000 people, civilian people, to die, because what do these sanctions aim at? They hit the civilian population, they lower the living standard, make everything expensive, and people die of hunger and lack of medicines. So that is a time bomb ticking, because the 30-day deadline, that means that the situation is on absolute fire. Now, just to mention one more item, which I think is important, and that is there was just the arrest of the so-called coordinator of the Nord Stream sabotage in Italy, a man, the Ukrainian, who supposedly was the commander of the operation, whereby the 15-meter long sail yard was the tool with which the sabotage was carried out. The German authorities say that all 7 who participated in this have now been identified. One man died on the battlefield in Ukraine. The other 5 are known, at least their identity is known. Now, that story, I think, is extremely doubtful. There are many experts around the world in many countries who doubt absolutely that this very sophisticated operation could have been carried out from a small sailboat with practically hobby divers. It's completely ludicrous. And Russia and China and other countries have demanded an independent investigation to establish complete transparency what this was. Now, this is not just a terrorist attack, but remember that the Nord Stream sabotage changed the geopolitical landscape, because it not only started the present economic downfall of Germany and all of Europe, which is in high speed, but it was the beginning of completely separating geopolitically Europe from Russia. And that obviously was in the total benefit for the United States during the Biden administration, because now Germany and other Europeans are buying LNG gas from the United States at prices 3 to 4 times higher than the cheap gas from Russia. And that was the beginning of the collapse of the German economy. And I can only tell you, France is bankrupt. On the 8th of September, there will be a vote of no confidence of Prime Minister Bayrou. All likelihood is that will be lost. Then there will be either a new prime minister, which is very unlikely that an agreement can be found, or the National Assembly is dissolved, parliamentarian election, or Macron resigns, and then presidential elections. In any case, there is no stable government, and the French economy is in a free fall, as is even more dramatically the German economy, where you have bankruptcies, insolvencies, unemployment rising. And I can only see that in the next several weeks and months into the fall and winter, we will have a complete collapse of Germany and the European economies. Now, that is the result and late consequence of the sabotage of Nord Stream 2, and therefore we absolutely have to demand that the demand from Russia in particular, but also China, who has made the point that if that state terrorism is not investigated, no critical infrastructure at no place in the whole world is secure. So an independent, real investigation is absolutely required. Now, the ongoing militarization of Europe, and unfortunately of Germany in particular, is also going full speed ahead. The so-called coalition of the willing do not give up their intention to keep the war going in Ukraine, which is clearly lost on the battlefield. And nevertheless, there are ominous developments going on, the latest of which is that there was a meeting of the German cabinet in the defense ministry in a room which is called the submarine room, because it is completely isolated and basically you cannot eavesdrop in that room. It's protected against surveillance. So why do they meet there? Well, there was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, General Grinkevich, and it is only my guess what they may have been discussing. But when these kinds of meetings are taking place, one better should really be extremely alarmed, because the ongoing, armament and operational plan Germany, whereby the army is going to the schools, trying to recruit pupils to join the army, and the general narrative that there will be an attack by Russia on a European country, the latest by 2029, that is being repeated by all these mainstream media on a daily basis. So this is the situation. Now, fortunately, there is something else going on entirely concerning the global majority. On 2 days from now, or actually tomorrow, starts the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Tianjin in China, where Prime Minister Modi will probably meet with Xi Jinping on the sidelines. President Putin is the guest of honor. 34 leaders of other countries will participate. And, maybe President Trump will not go there, which we had tried to, evoke by our appeal. It does not seem that he goes there, but maybe he has deserved the Peace Nobel Prize because he got India and China much closer together, and that can only serve peace. So that's a good thing. But jokes aside, I think this event in Shanghai, in the Shanghai Cooperation meeting, they will present their 10-year strategic plan. So we should be very interested to hear that, because I'm sure there will be a lot of economic and other integration of Eurasia around that. And then on the 3rd of September, you will have on the one side the military parade in Beijing, commemorating the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in the Pacific. And that will be a super important event as well. I'm sorry, Putin will be the guest of honor at that. I mixed it up before. So that will be a very, very important demonstration. And at the same day, on September 3rd, the Vladivostok East Economic Forum will also start, where one of the main topics is the development of the Arctic. And one already knows more than 6,000 firms will be there. Many countries of the global south will see their chance to invest together with Russia and others to develop the kinds of raw materials which they are very poor of. And if Germany had if the leadership were still in the realm of sanity, they would say, let's cooperate with Russia because Germany has no raw materials and we need to develop such secure raw materials in cooperation with Russia and the BRICS. I'm not sure that such sane statements will come, at least not at this moment. So, but this will be hopefully a place where the continuation of the potential of building the Bering Strait between Alaska and Eurasia will be also on the table. At least we will try everything we can to make sure that it's being discussed, because that would be a core piece of our World Land Bridge proposal as the economic basis for a lasting peace in a new security and development architecture, which must take care of the interest of every single country on the planet. So that is what my short introduction in the beginning is. So as you can see, the dangers are extremely severe and acute. On the other side, a way out is already visible, namely for the Western countries to simply join the global majority, and everything would be very easy to be solved. So that's my initial report.
Thank you, Helga, for that. And I just want to encourage people who are in the audience, because we will get to the discussion period after the opening panel, but discussing the UN Uniting for Peace resolution, just want to encourage people to hop on and give their thoughts on how we can get this out and report back on what you think we could do. So I just want to encourage that during the discussion. But thank you, Helga, for that. Next, I'd like to bring in Professor Talaroya, who is the Executive Director of the Russian National Committee on BRICS Research, the Director of the Asian Strategy Center Institute of Economics, and the Chief Researcher of the Institute of China and Contemporary Asia of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been very busy in between all these meetings happening in Russia, so we appreciate you hopping on today.
Yes, thank you. I'm leaving tomorrow, so I'm a bit busy, but I welcome today's meeting, which is very important because it comes on the eve of another even more important meeting, which is in fact crucial and maybe a milestone in the global politics. I'm talking about the meeting in Beijing and in Tianjin, which is there to convene the leaders of SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's more or less a routine thing, but it's of special significance now because a new declaration will be adopted concerning the approaches of the SCO countries to the global and regional problems, security problems. And this is a sort of a, not exactly a manifesto, but at least a comprehensive presentation of how these Eurasian countries, dozens or Eurasian countries, see the security challenges and how to address them. So it's important. And even more important is the meeting in Beijing to celebrate the end of the Second World War, which ended with the defeat of the Imperial Japan. And China hosts this meeting along with 24 of other leaders of countries, mostly from the global south. It is important that we have both Russian, Chinese, and Indian leaders there. We know that these measures have brought together India and China, which were for a long time, I would say, not very kind to each other, but now they have overcome the differences and find that there are more in common for them than that what separates them. Partly this is due to President Trump's policies of tariffs and his desire to force India to stop buying purchasing Russian oil, and India have reacted very harshly, and instead decided not only to continue to import Russian oil, but also to bridge the gap with China. And this is one of the first times for a long time that Indian leader goes to China. So we'll have a real manifestation of this unity of the global South countries, headed by this big troika, China, Russia, and India, who will show their unity in confronting the current challenges. And the current challenge is, in fact, the separation of the world into two blocks. One, the so-called collective West, that's G7 plus several more supporters, and actually all the others. This Western bloc is becoming more and more aggressive, and I'm really concerned with what's going on in Europe. US President Trump's have changed his position. The Alaska meeting with President Putin was very important for trying to overcome the differences and to find some solution for the Ukrainian peace. However, it looks as if European countries, EC countries, are very much against any peaceful solution or against any solution. This is not just a temporary phenomenon. What is more dangerous is that the European countries somehow decided that the future for them is the war against Russia. They're gearing up their military industry. They're introducing new military programs as if they're going to go to war against Russia altogether, with no particular reason. And as I've said, this is a long-term policy. And even if we find a solution of some kind in Ukraine, I don't think this policy may stop unless we have a total change in the mind of the political elites and the regimes in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And I don't see this happening anytime soon. Ukrainian issue is not something temporary which can be overcome in a short run. There will be lots of troubles ahead, and although we may finally find a solution to Ukrainian conflict, that doesn't mean that the conflicts won't erupt on other areas surrounding Russia. It looks like the battle for dominance of the West against the rest, and I really don't know what to do with it, how it can be changed. The world is, of course, undergoing transition from a unipolar world to multipolar, a polycentric world, where the strength, first of all, economic strength and competitive strength of new emerging power centers is growing. And this is objective process. It cannot be stopped just by violence from the West. However, the West is trying to overcome this tendency to keep its dominance. And this is the root cause of the current turmoil in the global scale. Of course, the current U.S. administration policies seem to more reasonable, but we understand pretty well that the deep state or the political class of U.S. are still deeply concerned with keeping the dominance and conflicting with China and Russia as their principal enemies and competitors, one economically, one military. There's no guarantee that after President Trump term in office will end. This way or other, that the policy of hostility towards Russia and China will get new new kind of breath. The measures which are suggested are all inadequate. Even, for example, building the tunnel under the Bering Strait, which could symbolize the connection between Russia and the US, may be symbolic. But I don't think that we may have time enough to do this before the winds will blow other way in the US. And even if they start such a construction, I'm not sure it will be finished. Therefore, I said that the situation is still very concerning. Maybe we have stepped back a little bit from the thermonuclear war, which might have erupted this year, early this year. But still, we haven't gone far from the threshold, and we can get there back, unfortunately, very quickly and quite unexpectedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Talaraya. I know you've been very busy, and this was actually a very important, useful intervention that you're making on what's happening. I wanted to see, Helga, if you had a response before we continued. I think if I heard right, you might have to leave soon.
No, I think Professor Talaraya, you unfortunately expressed the picture as it is, and I think that the only hope is that the voice of the global majority speaks out at these three events, the SCO, and the Beijing 80 years commemoration of the Second World War in Vladivostok, and that the collective voice of the global South, which happens to be the global majority, is being heard loudly in the collective West, because it is still my hope and conviction that the only way how we will get out of this danger would be that more reasonable forces in Europe and in the United States just say, let's end this geopolitical game, which can only lead to the destruction of all of humanity, and replace confrontation with cooperation. And it is my absolute conviction that all problems could be solved very easily if such a change of mind would occur. Maybe you can say something about what your thinking is in that respect.
Thank you, Helga. We don't see any signs that the way of thinking may change, because, as I've said, the way of thinking is based on very egoistic interests. That the 1 billion of the Western citizens, the so-called gold billion, they live by exploiting all the others, or the other 7 billion people. And this is based on the economic system, which is based on the financial system created after the Second World War, which lets the Western economies exploit others. And this exploitation is guaranteed by military force and by psychological warfare. And if it stops, I think that the whole dollar-based system will be changed. And that will mean disaster for the Western economies, because they're producing very little these days. And the physical production, the physical economy have moved elsewhere, while the vast part of Western countries are just parasiting on it. So these are the fundamental issues which determine the attempts of the West to keep their domination, to keep the dominance of the rest of the world, and it cannot be changed by simple change of mind in the minds of elite. The more I see it, the more I see that the elites will fight till the end, even at the risk of putting all the humanity at peril.
Well, I would like to answer that briefly. I think you need a little bit more differentiated analysis because the golden billion is not a homogeneous group. The governments which are the warmongers right now in the coalition of the willing have a very thin support. Macron, this government will be not there next week. Starmer has maybe one-digit support in the British population, and Merz has at best 29%, and the CDU-CSU 24%. So that is not exactly a majority. And the reality is that because of the dramatic collapse, the vast majority of people will absolutely lose everything. Merz just said, that the present German economy cannot maintain the social welfare state. That means they will go for massive cuts, which will ruin the livelihood of many, many people. And that's why I'm saying that if there would be a clear offer coming from the global majority of cooperation, like joint ventures in the development of Africa, joint ventures in the development of the Far East, whereby it is becoming clear to the majority of the people of Europe that that there is another way, because people don't want to go to war. It's just that when they only hear the mainstream media, then they are despairing. And I can tell you, people in Germany and France are getting quite desperate. In the United States, they're getting quite desperate. So I think it does require a little bit more intervention, not just because it's the elite are, like you say, Merz was the CEO of BlackRock, Germany, for many years, and he obviously has more the interest of the military industrial complex in mind than the oath he swore to defend the common good of the people. But I think that there is much more room for intervention, which is what we should concentrate on.
Yes, Helga, I would like to be as hopeful as you are. And of course, I've got, even personal reasons to believe it. My daughter lives in Europe, in Austria, in fact, and I would like to see peace and prosperity in Europe as well. But we had many hopes, for example, when President Trump came to power, because we saw, at least I saw, as a true manifestation of democracy. He was genuinely elected by the people who wanted some change. And he tried to provide, he tried to deliver on his promises. But so far, what we see is that there's not much is being achieved, and I don't know when and how it will be achieved. So even if the people would express their will in a quite rigid and quite sincere manner, that doesn't necessarily mean that even a new government, another political force, will implement their will. That's why I sound maybe a bit more pessimistic than you are, but I would like it to be right.
I think we have to work on it harder.
Yeah, I think it's a good goal to have. Well, is there any more that you'd like to discuss through with Helga? Otherwise, we can continue with our agenda.
Thank you. No,
Yes.
no, I've said enough. Maybe too much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Talaroya, for your insights and your perspective. It's actually good for other people, especially Westerners here, to hear from your thoughts in Russia and what the Russians are thinking.
Sorry for being a bit too blatant. I'm not speaking on behalf of Russian government.
No, absolutely not. No, but
majority,
yes, but it's still very useful to hear. So I'd like to continue and bring in Graham Fuller, who's a former U.S. diplomat former CIA official and Islamic scholar, for the discussion to continue this process. Do we have you on, Graham? Oh, you're muted, my friend. Here, I'll send you the prompt.
Yeah.
There
Can
we
you
go.
hear me?
I can
Good.
hear you now.
Good. Thank you. And thank you, Nastasia. It's always a pleasure to see you and bringing these groups together. Um, sadly, there is a wealth of things to talk about as to what's wrong with the world and how possibly to fix any of it. I've talked a lot in the past about various issues, but today I would like to talk a little more briefly, come back to the problem of Russia. And I mean, one always begins with Ukraine, but as we know, Ukraine is just the symptom of a much deeper malaise and crisis between the U.S. and Russia, or now increasingly and sadly even Europe and Russia, for reasons that are not entirely clear. But I'll talk about that a bit. Anyway, it's not Ukraine. So Ukraine is not the issue. There are lots and lots of fine specialists who talk about this all the time, and I listen to them as well myself and learned a great deal. But we also know that Russia and Putin in particular has talked about the need for a broader European security arrangement that would include the security interests of all parties and not just simply Western Europe or Ukraine or others, but all parties, which would obviously include Russia. As people have pointed out, if my security becomes ever and ever stronger, your security becomes ever and ever weaker. So there's no, it's not a zero-sum game. I'd like to talk also. I'm very excited by the Schiller Institute's idea of this land bridge in the Bering Straits, because I think it's a highly creative idea and always obviously goes back some time in the Schiller Institute's thinking, and perhaps Lyndon LaRouche as well. It's a terrific idea, and obviously the idea that it would be this massive link between Eurasia and the North American continent is quite extraordinary. I sadly do not believe that the economic arguments for it, which are powerful and exciting and original, I sadly believe that the political barriers at this point still would tend to block it, and particularly in the United States. I can see people talking about building this bridge, and suddenly you're going to have communists rushing through the tunnels into Alaska or something like that. Believe me, people will be talking like that. So I think what we need to get more deeply into the problem of Russophobia in the United States, which is very, very deep. But first of all, we have to, as always, thank our British so-called allies for having put this poison pill into the United States, as well as having created it on its own. We all know that the British created this idea of Russophobia with its obsessive imperial fears of Russian Empire coming down across the Himalayan mountains and invading the British Empire in India. Well, that's where it started, and it's gotten it. Then there's the inordinate fear of communism, as somebody once called it. There are many grounds for this. Unfortunately, at this point, I think the United States has gotten itself very deeply into a mindset of Russophobia that it does not see an easy answer out of it. We all know that, particularly after the Ukrainian war began, that the United States in particular began this process of literally culturally cleansing the United States of all this what they perceived as Russian danger or that surrounded us, even in the cultural terms. So we sent home ballerinas and musicians and all kinds of intellectuals and artists back to Russia to keep the United States pure, as it were. Well, that can be turned around. There's no reason why a lot of this can't be turned around. And I would think, frankly, one thing, and Ray and I had talked about this at some time in the past, but it seems very much to me that the one single figure in the United States, more recent modern U.S. history, who enjoys a magnificent reputation in the United States among most people, and that is the President Ronald Reagan. We know he was a very genial man. He was interested in peace, and he actually took the major step of going to Reykjavik to meet with Gorbachev at that point to hopefully define some solution to East-West tensions. I think we could very possibly, at least in the United States, return and revitalize the image of Reagan, his wonderful smile, his handshakes with Gorbachev, all of these things, which would show that a great patriot, a great American, blah, blah, all of those things that Ronald Reagan stands for, actually himself was a proponent of getting along with Russia. I think that would have a great deal of leverage in the United States, and particularly even in the MAGA groups who admire him also. So that's one thing. At least identify Reagan as the poster boy for better relations with the United States. Secondly, and we're getting down into the weeds here, and I'm sure there are lots of other people, including Ray, who will have things to offer on this, but maybe trying to reverse this cultural ethnic cleansing, we might invite Russian institutions, whatever they might be, universities, to come and help and establish and invest in new centers of studies for Russian studies that would include not just communism versus capitalism and all that tired stuff, but also the great traditions of Russian history and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Russian Christianity, which has a deep, deep tradition. I think this could be made very appealing if it could be allowed to come back. But right now, Russophobia absolutely blocks all this, which sadly, I think blocks as well the path to a very enlightened new path through Alaska and the Bering Straits. If we come to Europe very briefly, first of all, I think I've said this before, I think Europe is at a very state of deep crisis. Helga has said this repeatedly and knows it better than I do. I see Russia, I'm sorry, I see Europe, excuse me, as very much at this point entirely hors de combat. I don't mean that literally, because Europe is desperately trying to get into combat as much as it can in Europe, but it's meaningless, except symbolically. And as so many more serious military commentators than I am have pointed out that once the U.S. pulls out, the game is over, and the idea of Europe doing anything further is impossible. But what is wrong with Europe? Why has Europe signed on to all of this and crazy Russophobia? Well, the Cold War probably had something to do with it, but I think it's very striking that two significant countries, maybe three even, yes, three, one is Slovakia, one, and more importantly, is Hungary, and thirdly, East Germany, which was occupied by the Soviet Union for what, 30, 40, 50 years. These three states who know, and Russia has, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary twice and invaded Czechoslovakia to put down rebellions. And it occupied and dominated Eastern Europe. These three countries, East Germany, Slovakia, and Hungary today, are among the most favorably disposed towards to working with Russia. Why is that? I think that's a very fascinating phenomenon. They know the perils of Russia as well as anybody. So I think one other fact, it's not the first time I or others have mentioned it, but it's really worth repeating all the time. Russia has in fact invaded the West, Western Europe, twice. The first time was when Napoleon, around 1820, invaded Russia, burnt down Moscow, and then Russia drove Napoleon back out and all the way back into Europe and cooperated with the Europeans to put an end to the Napoleonic Empire. At that time. That was Russia's first invasion. I'm chasing out Napoleon. The second time, Hitler invaded Europe. And destroyed Moscow, and it took 25 million Russian lives to drive Hitler's Germany out, but they finally did. But at that point, Stalin chose to stay in Western Europe, as we all know, for a very long time, and that was not a pretty picture that I'm sure Europe unfortunately does remember. But both times, Soviet and Russian presence in Europe was due to Western invasions, prompted by literal Western invasions, not just NATO expansion or something, literal Western invasions. All right, so I'm not sure what the way out of all of this is, but I think Europe ultimately should come to its senses on economic grounds, their dependence on Russian energy, the fact that the fact that Russia very much would like to be part of the European experiment, the European community. I think it's very possible. And God knows when Europe will decide that actually they are living next to Eurasia, and Eurasia is the rising world power through BRICS and SCO and other forces. Is Europe going to cut itself off and remain this tiny little Atlanticist island, clinging to the US, which is in itself sinking in so many terms of national power and cultural power? Is that what Europe is choosing? I find this quite incredible, but I have hopes that, as Helga has talked about, change is underway, maybe imminently in Russia. I'm sorry, in Germany and in France, and hopefully in the UK. So that's pretty much what I have to say on this. I think there is clear room for cooperation with Russia and indeed with China as well. But when the atmosphere is ideologically poisoned, then it is extremely difficult to speak of practical and even innovative ideas for cooperation that are simply shoved away, pushed aside by the hardliners in the United States and in Europe. But there is hope. The folly, the foolishness, the insanity of where Europe now stands in all of this cannot last. That's my hope in any case. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, for your for your insights into the process. It's very useful, as always, to have your input
Thank you.
onto what's happening. So thank you very much for that. And the hope for the change in Europe can't happen a moment too soon. It's for their own sake that this has to happen. But as they say, there is an end to the tyrant's power. So it is coming up to that point, I believe. So thank you. I'd like to bring in Ray McGovern, who I'm sure many of you know, is a regular on the International Peace Coalition. He's a former CIA analyst, co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and a wonderful interventionist. So please go ahead, Ray. Welcome.
Thank you, Anastasia. Can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Good. Okay. Well, I just have to thank Graham for his tour d'horizon. it was really good, and it points out why Graham was one of my superiors way back when. Graham was in the position often as acting Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, you got that? In other words, head of the whole National Intelligence Council at that time, which was the predecessor before Congress created the National Intelligence Director and so forth. So, so I just have to say that Graham was looking long term, and he was talking to various directors. And I should probably say that we were contemporaries from the beginning, starting in 1963. But as we became more senior, I would be briefing Director Casey at 11:30 in the morning about what the president's daily brief bring in terms of reaction from the vice president, secretary of state, and so forth. And Graham would be talking to Bill Casey in the afternoon about the wider problems, like the ones that he just so well elucidated. So that's just to put a little point on that. Now, in my view, Graham summed it up nicely at the end: is there is hope. Okay. Now, why is there hope? There is hope because Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi are in no rush. They see that what the old Soviets used to call the world correlation of forces had shifted in a tectonic way toward the majority, toward those you will see watching the parade on the 3rd or the 2nd of September, just a few days from now. It's just a metaphor that won't quit. Look at all the people who are there. Look at the people who are not there. Look at the Westerners. As far as I know, only the Slovakia, Hungary, and I think the Serbia people are from the West. The rest are all the majority of the rest of the world. The good news, once again, is that not only Xi, he comes from a civilization that has never been in a hurry, right? I'm convinced that Xi would be left to his own devices if we didn't provoke him. Why do we provoke him? Because we need to build ships and we need to build all kinds of aircraft and so forth. And Taiwan is a really good place to sell this stuff. Come on, okay? So in my view, Xi is in a waiting game. He can wait. His attitude and China's attitude has always been, can't we just get along? I mean, like, how about a win-win? Okay, that's my view on China. Putin is the same way, except he's got real problems on his hands from the coalition of what shall we call them? Well, I used to call them the coalition of the lemmings. Okay, but they're lemmings without any. I mean, they don't know who to follow now. For God's sake, the U.S. Daddy. You'll remember that the Secretary General of NATO called Trump Daddy at the last NATO summit. Oh, Daddy's here. Well, Daddy turns out to be what's the word? A deadbeat. For those of you who don't know what a deadbeat, that's a guy who doesn't pay child support. Okay, so Daddy is there, but he doesn't pay child support. And if you need any further reflection of this, look at what Vice President Vance said. We're done with Ukraine. We're done with it. We're not going to give it any more support. So these lemmings don't have a master lemming. And I just don't know. That's where the real problem is. In my view, the Germans are a real danger now. And it doesn't matter what I think about the Germans, although I know them pretty well. Lived there 5 years. It counts what Putin and associates, and to some degree, Xi think of the Germans. Now, some of you may not know that since Graham and I joined the agency in 1963, there was a Glavny Vrak, okay, a main enemy, and that was the Soviet Union, okay? And their main enemy was the United States of America. Guess what? After all those years, just this year, earlier this year, the main enemy changed for Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. Guess who it is now? You guessed it, Germany. We've been there before. We've had people like Merz before. I mean, Merz has just told his own people that, social programs, the things that made us comfortable, the social programs, the social democracy, well, we're going to have to pull in our belts here. That's not going to be possible because we got to build our military strength. I mean, if I'm Putin looking at that, I'm saying, oh my God. Now, despite all that, I think Putin sort of says, well, I'll play a perspicacious, a waiting game here. I think there's hope with Trump. Now, don't take my word for it. Every now and then, Putin says this explicitly. Exactly 1 week ago, he was talking to a group of young scientists. And I have to quote what he said. He was asked about relations between Russia and the United States. And he said, well, let's see, translate this. Okay, with respect to relations with the US, they are extremely low level, okay? But I've talked a lot about this in the past, and now this is the Russian. Но с приходом президента Трампа, я думаю, такой свет в конце туннеля. Свет, light, туннеля, tunnel. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, now this is just a week ago with Trump making all these other crazy proclamations and back and forth about how he's going to defeat Russia. Well, what I'm trying to say is the Kremlin is biding its time. It's got the majority. It's got Big Brother Xi, for God's sake. It's got everybody pretty much everybody in the global South. So what he's saying here, I'll hit translate. In all this, with the arrival of Presidenta Trump, I think there's such a thing as there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Well, wow. Now, was that reported anywhere? I haven't seen that reported anywhere. You have to watch these things. You have to listen. You have to read them, okay? Nobody does that anymore except Graham and I. So what does it mean? Well, is he delusionary? No, I think he really believes that Trump is going to be around 3 more years, that there's a reasonable prospect that they can work out something on Ukraine, the more so since J.D. Vance has said, we're out of there. We're finished. We're done. Bad grammar, but we're done with, he should know better. I think he went to one of those fancy schools. We're done with Ukraine. So what else? I just say, and I don't want to go very much longer because Graham pretty much said it all. And thanks, Graham, for doing that. Makes it easy for me. I'll just say that what happens in Beijing and with the Shanghai Cooperation Group, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for how the correlation of forces has changed. How now it's not only 2 against 1 with Russia and China against the US. It's 3 against 1. We've succeeded in alienating India so much that they'd prefer to deal with China rather than deal with us. And it's a very artful diplomacy if you want to scupper the United States of America. So, big thing here is that Merz is a real threat. And I would just say that the Russians just sent the signal. 2 years ago, we had an intercept between Luftwaffe generals. The heads they're communicating with each other. One was in the Far East. Somebody intercepted, I don't know who, okay? And they said, oh my God, the Taurus, when you're briefing the Minister of Defense, please tell them that the Taurus, we need to have Germans in there to make that work. And so, that's a big step. You want Germans in Ukraine? Oh my God, that's awful. Well, what's happened now? The Germans said, well, that is a little dangerous. And so we'll build a factory in Ukraine and we'll assemble the Taurus there. We'll have a couple of advisors, but, and then that will fool the Russians. What did the Russians do last week? They obliterated, pardon the term, this factory that was building a Taurus missile. Now they can do that. And my fear is that if the Germans and the US go ahead with this deal, this bilateral deal outside of NATO, whereby the US will reintroduce intermediate nuclear capable missiles into Germany, I think that something like what happened to the Taurus factory might happen in Germany itself. And do I think that the Germans will be appealing to the US at that time? I think that certainly they will. Then we'll see if Article 5 of the NATO Treaty really is in effect, whether Wiesbaden, to protect Wiesbaden or retaliate for Wiesbaden, requires to sacrifice Detroit or New York or, God forbid, Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay? So anyhow, things are in flux, things are in change. The good news is that we have gradualists in Beijing and in Moscow and in New Delhi. The switch in forces is just won't quit. And I want to finish here just by saying that when the Russians have decent polling numbers, okay, and they do, they have Levada, they have other people that are really respected widely. When they come up with a sea change, metaphorical though it may be, that most Russians consider the Glavny Vrag, the main enemy, to be Germany now. Well, that's no good for anybody. We know what happened last time. So do the Russians. They're not going to put up with too much more from Merz. So that's where I see the real problem with Germany. Now, my hope is that the Germans will get some sense in themselves. The French will kind of dissolve as they're already doing, and the British Stormer is not long for this world. Like I don't know who's come in, but they're the lemmings, and they have no one to. I mean, there's no lemming like the U.S. jumping off the cliff. They're not going to follow them very much longer. So I have a more hopeful note. The big thing is when Putin says there's light at the end of the tunnel, which he did exactly 1 week ago. He knows the history. He knows how people misused that during Vietnam. So he's going out on a limb here, okay? He's saying, I believe Putin, I believe that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, metaphorically, once again, there is a tunnel under discussion. That's the one under the Bering Strait. So there's lots of play here. Again, I see a cup not only half full, but I see a cup 3/4 full, not only after Alaska, the summit there, but also as a result of this manifestation of the whole rest of the world is against you, Mr. Trump. Come to terms, be sensible, listen to Witkoff, don't listen to these other crazies. They'll just get you in a peck of trouble. And I'll finish with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. And hopefully soon our cuppeth will be runneth over. Which would
nice,
be
a nice
very
one.
thank you, which would be very important to do at this point. But I wanted to, because we definitely have people who are sending in lots of messages, lots of questions happening right now. I wanted to go to Helga real quick for a response, and then Graham and Ray, if you guys wanted to add anything for the discussion before we moved on. Go ahead, Helga.
Well, I have a better part of me who is an optimist, and I, in that sense, agree with you, Ray, that if you look at the long arc of history, it bends towards progress and justice. So I'm absolutely certain that if we get out of this present crisis, that there will be a beautiful future of humanity, because I think man is capable of reason. And if you think about all the incredibly beautiful things mankind has already produced, all the pieces of art in China, in India, in Persia, in Europe, I mean, there is something about human beings which I think is, making them capable of facing every challenge. I mean, having said that, I however think that we are in a short-term, extremely dangerous situation, because I mean, this idea that the Russians are now saying that the Fourth Reich is reappearing in Germany and Europe. I mean, it's extremely worrisome. I mean, anybody who considers what happened in World War II, should really have sleepless nights over that thing. And, I was talking with a contact earlier today, and I said, I'm a political battle horse, I've been in politics now for a very long time, but still I cannot understand what is driving these people to for no good reason risk the existence of our country. And then this person basically said, well, maybe it is that these people are bored, that they have some advantage from what they do, and that weighs more than their consideration for the well-being of the country in the long term. I don't know, it's still, if you know, what does it help you if you get riches, if everything is being destroyed in the end? And I think there are many Russians who even wrote books, that if Germany continues on its present course, it will be wiped out. I mean, if Germany is the one country which is the most in danger if it comes to war, to be completely wiped out, because already in the past, in all nuclear maneuvers of NATO, the existence of Germany does not play a consideration at all. I mean, people who have participated in NATO maneuvers, they know that, and they have been reporting that. So I think we must make, and therefore I welcome what both Professor Toloraya and Graham, what you are saying, and Ray, you have to shout loud into Germany, because I think especially Russians and Americans and people from the outside have to make themselves heard, so that maybe some of these Germans who are sleepwalking right now are waking up. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Professor Tolaraya, if you are still there, you're welcome to jump in too before we continue to the discussion period.
Yes, if I may. Well, I really enjoyed Dr. McGovern's talk and Helga's comment. And if she doesn't understand, then I feel myself less stupid, because if you don't understand what's happening to Germany, to Europeans in general, then how can we understand? We in Russia have no idea of attacking Europe or conquering Europe. What for? And we don't know where this strange idea come from and how they were implanted into the Europeans' mind. But it is there, and we think that's well, we cannot do anything about it. We have just to take this into consideration, have to react, and this is the spiral which can go on further and further and end up in a conflict. That's very dangerous, and I really don't know what to do about it.
Oh, go ahead, Helga.
To you, Professor Toloraya, I mean, in Germany, there are more and more people waking up. We have demonstrations on the 1st of September, which is the World Peace Day, because this was the outbreak of World War II. And then we have a demonstration, I think, on the 13th of September, another one on the 3rd of October. This is supposed to be the big one. And, I think if President Putin would simply send a message to these peace demonstrations in Germany and say that there is absolutely no intention by Russia to attack Germany or Europe, and that this is all not true, I think these people would react to it, because I think you should. I think if President Putin would do such a thing, East Germany would go absolutely on, because they don't believe the NATO narrative at all, because they know they have a completely different social uprising in the Soviet Union. And I think I would really hope that Russian strategic planners are coming up with some way of outdoing this NATO narrative and not just be part of a spiral of escalation, which will end in a catastrophe.
Well, May, I don't think that, of course, it's possible, but I don't think it helped because, well, thanks to propaganda, Putin for Europeans is sort of devil in flesh. Who's going to believe it? You don't believe ordinary people who say, "Well, we Russians, we would love to, to go to Europe, to spend our hard-earned petrodollars or gas euros, or in beer study in restaurants and buying." German Mercedes-Benzes and Audis, but you sanctioned us. You don't want us to do this. Okay, we'll survive, but this is our real desire, and we lived quite in a good manner for 20 years. Now it all gone to ashes, and I don't know why.
Well, we have to conspire more.
Okay, okay. We can write letters. We can produce stories, but I don't think that Europeans tend to believe it. That's a problem.
Well, I think this idea of addressing the people themselves is actually very interesting because the leadership is really what's been the big problem, the so-called people who are in there who are being controlled. But the general population, I can say from personal experience, I was in Berlin organizing in the streets, and people were scared to say what they really thought. But when you talk to them in private, they're like, how do we stop this? Like, none of these people represent us. What do we do? And so meeting the Schiller Institute and people like us in the streets, it was almost like a smack to the face, or a smack of breath of fresh air or something. Like, oh my God, actually somebody I can talk to about what I really think. It was almost too good to be true for many of them. I think that at least with the Germans, what I got a sense of is that if they had an idea that they could act to do something, that there was something more to free them, then they could actually do more. I don't think I don't believe that the representation that you're seeing right now actually represents what the people think. So if there was an address from Russia to these demonstrations, that actually might have a very big effect. Just
Anastasia, well, I said I've got my daughter who is Russian, but she lived most of her life in a German language milieu, and she's very skeptical to what I'm saying. He said, "Well, Russia is backward, and we are aggressive, so that's why Europeans are afraid of Russians." And what can I do?
Oh, Ray, I see you have go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. Can I be heard? I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Doesn't that personify the problem? I too am back from a week in Germany. It's the media. It's the media that has indoctrinated so many people, both in Germany and in the US. You talk about your daughter, I could talk about one of our 5 children, okay? It's really hard for them to believe that the Russians don't have horns in the back of their heads, okay? Now, that's the problem, the media. When Elizabeth Murray and I traveled through Germany, speaking at several cities. The last one was at the Schiller Institute program there that Anastasia just referred to in Berlin. What I noticed was that everyone was under the influence of the media, except for those who would very, very quietly say, "Oh yeah, we have to do something about it." The media in Germany is worse than the media in the United States.
No.
It's as bad as the media in Britain. Now, let me give you, well, let's see. Yeah, let me just say one more thing. that Russia has designs on Europe, okay? Biden, he used to be our president. You probably remember him. You think Russia would stop in Ukraine? Oh, God, no. They were going to Poland. They're going to the Baltic states. President Biden said that. He lied. Why? How can I say that he lied? Because the Russians already stopped. They stopped in April, 6 weeks after they invaded Ukraine. They stopped because they came to an agreement where Ukraine would not be in NATO. They stopped. They withdrew their forces from around Kiev as a goodwill gesture. They stopped. Do the Russians want to take all over Ukraine? Not if my sense of Putin is correct. They don't want another Vietnam, for God's sake. So they're going to stop before taking over all Ukraine, much less taking over Poland, much less taking. Why would you want to take over? I've been in Poland. I've been in the Baltics. Come on, folks. So it's the media. My God. Now, can I find a lighter note in this? Yeah, I can. I saw something yesterday. I laughed for 5 minutes. Here's a BBC questioner saying, with a big picture of Tony Blair, of all things, Tony Blair is getting involved in the Gaza crisis. He's talking with Kushner, and what do you think of that? And she asked one of the people she was interviewing, and she said, why do you think Tony Blair is involved? And this very smart person, a woman, she says, well, I already told you he's involved because Satan is unavailable this week. Okay, you got to keep your sense. No, that was the British. Okay, so maybe there are little glimmers of light here. Maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel, even with respect to our mainstream media. We got to keep trying to break in there. I think we're making some successes, and we should look back on those successes and not at the formidable obstacles still in our way. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray. Well, we have people who are basically busting out the door right now who want to get to the discussion. So we're going to.
I think Graham would like to say something, probably. Would you, Graham?
No, I've said all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll make the general announcement for people who are watching over YouTube and Rumble and X and wherever else this is being live streamed. If you want to be part of the discussion period, you must be registered to get the Zoom link. You can go to the schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the web page, you will see the link to go and register to get the Zoom. And with that, Dave, please let me know when we've cut the stream, and we'll continue.